The following program is a podcast1.com production.
Your healthy radio addiction starts now.
Power to the people!
The Laura Ingraham Show.
Welcome to the Laura Ingraham Show, your healthy radio addiction. I'm John Hinderaker from Powerline, filling in for Laura today. First of all, Merry Christmas to all of our listeners. I hope you are having a wonderful holiday season now in full swing. I hope your Christmas was as terrific as mine. I'm having a wonderful holiday season with just one exception. I got a terrible cold. If my voice sounds funny, that's the reason why. I'm pretty sure that in my entire life I have never been sick over the holidays before, so it's a new experience for me, and not a great one. It's no fun to be sick over Christmas time. I don't think I've ever used the cough button on the radio before, but today I'm pretty sure that from time to time I'm probably going to be hitting the cough button on account of this cold. So if you hear just a moment of dead air, don't change the station. It's probably just the cough button. You know, one thing I've noticed, I wonder if you've noticed this as well, and that is how unsympathetic wives are when their husbands are sick. You know, I tell my wife I'm at death's door. You know, it's terrible. I'm horribly ill, and all she'll say is, "I'm sure you'll be fine. It's only a cold." I mean, really, it's so unsympathetic, and I think it's probably typical of wives everywhere when their husbands are at death's door. And speaking of cold, by the way, I'm coming to you from Minnesota, and it is cold here. You know, we have this reputation, this image around the country. Somebody mentions Minnesota, and nobody thinks about 97 degrees in July or August. You know, they don't think about that. Somebody mentions Minnesota, and immediately people think cold, icicles, snow, frozen tundra. Well, you know, there's a reason for that. It does sometimes get cold here in the wintertime. I got in my car this morning and started driving to the studio, and it was 8 degrees below zero. That's pretty cold. And in fact, the high temperature today is not expected to reach zero. It should be below zero all day long, and that's been true for a couple days. I don't think where I live we have seen a positive temperature reading in the last couple of days, and we may not for another day or two more. That's not epic cold. Here in this part of the country, for epic cold, it's got to get to 20 below or lower, but it is plenty cold enough for most of us. So you may wonder, given that I'm suffering from this awful cold, and the place where I live is in the midst of this, is gripped by this sub-zero air mass that's come down from Canada. Am I depressed today? No, not at all. I'm in a terrific mood. And why? Why am I in such a terrific mood despite these hardships? I'm in a terrific mood because the Republicans have passed their tax reform bill. This is really important, and it's a terrific bill, and it came at a really critical time. I was frustrated. You were frustrated. President Trump was frustrated. Everybody was frustrated that throughout 2017, while the Congress did some good things, they repealed a number of terrible Obama-era regulations. They passed some relatively minor stuff. They approved a lot of terrific appointments by President Trump. They didn't have a major legislative accomplishment. And, of course, the clock is ticking. Historically, if a new administration wants to get something really significant done, it's got to do it fast. Remember, in the Obama administration, they rammed the so-called stimulus bill, which didn't stimulate anything. They rammed that through, and they rammed Obamacare through. They wasted no time while they had those majorities in the Congress. And here we were with the clock ticking and 2017 coming to an end, and no major legislative accomplishments for the president or for his party in Congress. Didn't always seem like his party, by the way. That was part of the problem. But the bottom line was they needed to accomplish something major. And with the tax bill, they really did. We're seeing tax cuts for the overwhelming majority of Americans. We're seeing business tax cuts. The corporate income tax, instead of being the highest in the developed world, is now going to be at a competitive 21% rate, which is similar to what most other countries have. A lot of changes in the tax bill. Not all of them good, in my opinion, but almost all of them positive and unquestionably will result in more economic growth. This is the most pro-growth tax bill that we've had in this country since the 1980s. By a mile. We haven't seen anything like this for a long, long time. And the Democrats, of course, have been licking their chops, thinking about the 2018 off-year elections. They believe they're going to take the House, and if they do take the House, they will, even if they take it by one vote, a one-vote majority in the House of Representatives, the Democrats will impeach President Trump. They absolutely are planning to do that. And, of course, there's no chance of a conviction in the Senate, but their strategy is to take the House, impeach the president, and then tie up the last 2 years of his administration in impeachment drama, which will make it impossible for him to get anything done. And certainly Congress won't get anything done. And with the Trump administration destroyed, as they see it, they'll be in a strong position to run in 2020. That's the Democrats' plan. And if the Republicans had ended this year with no major legislative accomplishment, you would have had to say that the Democrat plan probably was going to work. The tax bill may have forestalled that. And one of the funny things about this is just witnessing the hysteria, the insanity with which the Democrats have greeted the passage of the tax reform bill. It's really remarkable. You know, they're talking about this bill is going to crush the middle class. Well, how can you be crushed by having your taxes cut? It's extraordinary. I haven't heard any Democrat try to coherently explain what in the world they're talking about. And yet we have people like Nancy Pelosi, who, frankly, I mean, Nancy is incoherent. I think it may be time after all these years in Congress for Nancy Pelosi to see the handwriting on the wall and retire, because she has a very difficult time. She'll give a press conference and she just doesn't make any sense at all. She has alleged that this tax bill is the worst bill ever passed by the U.S. Congress, which is completely bizarre. I mean, what, worse than the Fugitive Slave Act? I mean, worse than the, what was it, the Kansas-Nebraska Act that led to the Civil War? I mean, what? Seriously? She refers to this as Armageddon, the end of the world. Let's play this clip, James. This is Nancy Pelosi talking about the Republican tax reform bill and how it resembles a certain famous monster of fiction.
It's about our future. This is a moment where people have the resolve to say, don't throw me a crumb and tell me that I'm benefiting when you're robbing the future by increasing the debt, rewarding the rich as you ransack the middle class. So there we have that. But in any event, this is an interesting year. It's only part of an interesting year. And they're taking great credit for this accomplishment. Well, I call it a Pyrrhic victory because it's a Frankenstein. And anybody who's familiar with Frankenstein knows that it was a monster that was created. Do you know the ending of the Mary Shelley's story? The monster comes back to destroy.
We're all going to be destroyed by the monster of having our taxes cut and having our companies become more competitive. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And she says that the bill ransacks the middle class. How are you ransacked by having your taxes lowered, having the standard deduction raised? It's really extraordinary. And of course, and I will say, to give them credit, to give the Democrats credit, this criticism has generally been rather muted. Nancy Pelosi did float it there in that segment, going to increase the debt, right? Well, first of all, I don't think it is going to increase the debt, because I think this tax reform bill is so pro-growth that I do think that federal revenues are going to be ample in the years to come, so that it probably won't increase the debt at all. certainly not by much. But the problem for the Democrats, of course, is that they stood by and cheered for 8 years while the Obama administration and Congress doubled the national debt. It went from $10 trillion to $20 trillion on Obama's watch, and not a single Democrat, to my knowledge, expressed any concern at all about doubling the national debt, adding $10 trillion to the national debt. And so it's a little late in the day for Nancy Pelosi suddenly to be saying, oh, this Republican tax reform bill, it's going to add to the debt. At least in this bill, if it does add to the debt, it'll add to the debt because our taxes have been cut, and not because the federal government is wasting even more money than before through things like the Democrats' silly stimulus package of 2009. We're going to run to a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk in a little more detail about the Republican tax plan and what it does and what effect it's already having on the American economy. We'll be right back after this.
Thanks to my wonderful sponsors and your support, I'm glad to say that we can provide this podcast at no cost to you at all. As a loyal listener of my program, please consider testing our sponsors because they're the ones who actually cover the cost to produce this daily show. So if you're a dog lover like I am, how about giving your dog, your best friend, a fresh, healthy, and nutritious diet? When dogs eat well, they live longer and happier lives. I'm here to tell you about NomNomNow.com, which cooks the world's best dog food. It's made fresh in the USA and delivered right to your door every week. Nom Nom Now's customized recipes cook fresh in our kitchen, delivering healthy nutrition you can actually see. Switch to Nom Nom Now and your dog will have more energy, a shinier, softer coat, and a longer, better life. Nom Nom Now really is the best food for your best friend. And right now you can save 50% on your first 2 orders of fresh, healthy dog food when you use my code Laura at NomNomNow.com. That's code Laura and save 50% on your first 2 orders. NomNom now.com. and code word LAURA.
Welcome back to the Laura Ingraham Show, your healthy radio addiction. I'm John Hinderaker from Powerline, filling in for Laura today. 855-40 Laura is the number to call if you want to weigh in on the Republicans' tax cut. Let's take a call right now. Let's go to Ricardo in Tennessee on line 1. Ricardo, welcome to the show.
Hey, buenos dias. Glad to be on. You're doing a great job.
Thanks.
Hey, 2 things to touch on real quick. Talking about the tax plan, I want to make a comment about the White House Magnolia, if I may. But
Go ahead.
Tax plan, the tax plan, there's of course, Democrats are going to come in with this is a tax cut for the rich, right? It only affects the rich. When actually there is a provision in this law that says if you make more than $1 million a year, you have an additional 3% tax over the top rate, okay?
Yeah, they disallowed deductions at some of the lower rates, as I understand it. But you're right. The real high income earners actually get taxed a little bit more in that provision, yeah.
3% over $1 million. So one of my liberal friends, of course, says, well, the only reason they did this was to make the numbers work for the CBO and such. And I said, so the problem you have is that the Republicans put the tax burden on making the numbers work on the rich. Shut them down.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? These guys won't take yes for an answer. I mean, what does it take to make them happy? I don't know. Of course, Ricardo, the top 1% of income tax payers pay 38% of the income tax, right? So if you're going to have a tax cut, guess what? It's going to help the people who actually pay taxes, not the people who don't.
Oh, this is liberal math right here. I'm glad you brought this up. I've been wanting to point this out. Here's liberal math for you. You get $50,000. If you pay $50,000 a year and you get a 2% tax cut, then you saved $1,000. If you pay $5,000 in taxes a year and get that same 2% tax cut, you saved $1,000. The rich guy saved 10 times as much as you. You see, that's liberal math. That's exactly what they do, even though they're incurring the biggest part of the tax burden.
Hey, Ricardo, let's go to that magnolia tree just for a moment, okay? And then I'm going to get back to the taxes. But I do want to go fire away on the magnolia tree. That's a funny story.
Okay. So if you know the magnolia, basically it's a hollow tree that's being held up by support cables and stuff like that, right?
And the White House we're talking about, yeah.
That's the White House. I'm sorry, thanks for clarifying that. The White House magnolia are getting ready to tear it down because it's a hollow tree being held up by cables and stuff. And I really thought that This is really symbolic of the Obama administration. You know, a useless shell being supported by outside influences.
I like it. Yeah, they actually poured concrete inside the tree at one point. It's become a safety hazard. And so the horticultural whatever at the White House said it's just got to be taken. It goes back to Andrew Jackson. It's a historic tree, but it's 200 years old. It's time to go. And so the newspaper's headline, Melania Trump to tear down historic magnolia tree. You can't, if you're the Trump family, you can't win. Ricardo, thanks for that call. We're going to go back now to talking about the Republican tax bill, which has got me just really happy this holiday season. This is from the Wall Street Journal yesterday, reporting on holiday shopping. I'll just quote here from the Wall Street Journal. Fueled by high consumer confidence and a robust job market, U.S. retail sales in the holiday period rose at their best pace since 2011, according to MasterCard's Spending Pulse, which tracks both online and in-store spending. Sales, excluding automobiles, rose 4.9% from November 1 through Christmas Eve, compared with a 3.7% gain in the same period last year. This is the kicker. Unlike in past years, when spending was driven by high-income shoppers, this holiday, a broader swath of the population opened their wallets, encouraged by rising wages and low unemployment, analysts and economists said. Fewer people are living paycheck to paycheck, said Chris Christopher, executive director of economic research firm IHS Markit. There's a lot more spending from the lower and middle income groups, while the upper income groups are splurging. So already we are seeing a Trump boom in the making. And of course, we've been seeing the stock market boom for a while because investors have been anticipating the kind of measure that we've just seen here with the tax reform bill. And it's only going to get better. Starting in February, a large majority of Americans are going to be seeing more dollars in their paychecks as their taxes are cut and fewer dollars are withheld. And I'd be curious to know what our listeners think about this. It seems to me that the Democrats, with their crazed mantra of tax cuts for the rich, which is all they know how to say, apparently they think taxes should just go up on everybody all the time. I don't know, but any tax cut proposal that's ever made by the Republicans, the answer is always the same: tax cuts for the rich. Well, to the extent that upper income people pay a lot of the income taxes, most of the income taxes, well, sure, they're going to benefit from tax cuts. I hope so. They should. But everybody benefits, and we're all going to benefit in the form of a stronger economy, a more competitive economy. When we get time later in the hour, we're going to talk about this. Forecasts that are being made in Europe about how investment is going to shift from Europe to the United States as a result of this tax plan. And the Europeans are trying to figure out what to do about that because they foresee many, many billions of dollars moving from Europe to the United States as a result of the Republican tax reform bill. We'll be talking about that later in the hour. But I wonder what the Democrats are going to do, having said the tax bill is Armageddon. It's Frankenstein's monster. It's going to come back and devour us. It's going to eat us. The middle class is being ravaged and ransacked. And then in February, which is not far off in the future, what happens? People see their paychecks getting bigger. I think I don't understand what the Democrats' plan is for how they're going to explain to all these people that they've been assuring the tax plan was going to be a disaster. How are they going to explain rising incomes? I really don't know how that's going to work. Well, we're going to go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to be joined by Professor Gary Wolfram of Hillsdale College. We'll be talking more about the tax cut.
This is Armageddon.
Cause I'm the tax man. Yeah, I'm the tax man.
When did the tax man become popular? I don't know, but the Democrats love the tax man. We're going to be joined by Professor Gary Wolfram in just a moment here talking about the Republican tax plan. But first, let's go real quick to Cindy in Iowa on line 1. Cindy, you're on the air.
Yes, I would like to say with this new tax plan, I think it's great because I think right off the top, filing jointly, it goes from like $12,700 your standard deduction to $24,000, amount.
Yeah, right.
So right off the bat, that's going to save me money at the end of the year.
Cindy, you're like, 80, 90% of Americans, maybe more. The tax cut's going to save you money. It's a good thing for you. It's a good thing for the economy. Let's go now to Professor Gary Wolfram of Hillsdale College. Gary, thanks for being on the program.
Well, thanks for having me.
Gary, you wrote a column in The Hill, a Washington newspaper, when President Trump's tax plan was unveiled, and your column was titled, Trump's Tax Plan is Out, and Low-Income Americans are the Winners. Now, what Congress has passed and Trump has signed is not exactly the same as the tax plan that Trump unveiled at the beginning of November. So my first question for you, Gary, is how different is the plan that got passed, and are low-income Americans still the winners?
Oh, no, it's very similar, and low-income Americans are going to be winners. Frederick Bastiat in 1848, he wrote a paper called What is Seen and Unseen. And he says the difference between a bad economist and a good economist is the bad economist sees the seen and the good economist sees the unforeseen. Now, when you see the corporate income tax rate dropping to what is basically the average for industrialized countries, people go, oh my gosh, these corporations are getting these big tax cuts. Well, you know what? I never sent a Christmas card to Ford Motor Company. I mean, only individuals can pay the tax. And in any public finance textbook, which I teach, will say, well, this is what's called the incidence of the corporate income tax. When you cut the corporate income tax, who's going to end up benefiting from that? Well, first of all, you're going to end up benefiting if you buy anything because prices are going to fall because it's now less expensive to produce. If you work, then you're going to have more demand for labor because we're going to be producing more things in the United States than we used to, and that will increase the demand for labor, so your wage is going to go up. And if you are, let's say you are have a pension, you're a fireman or firewoman or police officer, then what's going to happen is your pension has invested in stock, and the value of that stock's going up, so your pension is better off, so you're likely to do better once you retire. So the real thing that drives this for me is that this corporate tax cut is going to improve the economy for everybody. In particular, it's going to improve it for wage earners and people who buy goods at Walmart or whatever. And so that's who's going to benefit from this thing.
I wrote a post on my website, Powerline, a couple of days ago, Gary, and it was about the fact that in Europe, economists and policymakers are scrambling to figure out how they're going to cope with the tax cut, because they foresee that large amounts of investment are going to shift from Europe to the United States. And I linked to and quoted from an article about a report that's just been done by some German economists that was titled, Germans Fear Huge Loss of Jobs from U.S. Tax Reform. And the first line says, German investment in the U.S. This is just Germany. It's not world. This is not the whole EU. It's just Germany. German investment in the U.S. is expected to rise by 39 billion euros because of lower U.S. corporate taxes. So all around the world, people are recognizing that this bill is going to be great for the American economy.
Oh, yes. I mean, and you have to realize that we're only moving to where they've already gone. It's not like we're doing something, oh my gosh, the United States is cutting their corporate income tax rate, and we're going to be way below everybody else. We're just moving to what everybody else has already done. This is something that we should have done years ago. And, I mean, Ireland, 15%, and you don't get taxed on earnings that you make outside of the country. Not only do we impose a corporate income tax rate which is nearly double what the industrialized world is, we also tax you if you bring income that you earn somewhere else back into the United States. So what's happening is we've got trillions of dollars sitting over other countries, because if Amazon were to bring that, let's say, $1 million back to put in some sort of server, then it's going to have to pay the difference between what the tax rate is in Ireland and what it is in the United States. So why would they ever do that?
In other words, let's just pause on that, Gary, because it's a really important point. It's called repatriation. And these companies, whether they're American or foreign companies, are already paying taxes where they made the money. If they made the money in France, they've already paid the French income tax. And the United States, as I understand it, is the only country in the world where if you bring that money back, if you're an American company, you now get double taxed. In addition to the tax you already paid, we tax you again. Is that fundamentally right?
Right.
And
that's correct. Yes. We don't. If you earn, you only pay taxes in other countries. You only pay taxes on the income that you earn there. We not only make you pay taxes on income you earned here, but we make you pay taxes on income that you earned somewhere else.
And we're the only ones that do that. And as a result, economists have been saying for as long as I can remember that this is unbelievably stupid. Because as a result of that, all these companies are leaving trillions of dollars overseas. In many cases, they would like to invest it in the U.S., but they can't. If they did, they'd be double taxed on it. And so what do? They invest it someplace else. We've just been shooting ourselves in the foot. And until now, the Democrats have absolutely refused to rationalize that aspect of our corporate tax law. The Republicans have now finally done it.
Well, and it goes back to the seen and the unseen. It's easy for me, if I'm Bernie Sanders, to come out and say, oh my gosh, these corporations are getting all these tax breaks. Well, you have to see through that and say, oh, well, who's actually paying the corporate income tax? You are, in the form of lower wages and higher prices and less job opportunity. So when we cut that, the benefit is going to be to everyone.
Well, and also, of course, Gary, who do you work for? Well, most Americans work for corporations. I mean, the idea that this is somehow evil. Corporations are evil. I mean, most Americans, hey, some company is signing your paycheck. And we've already seen, it's been a big embarrassment to the Democrats, but we've already seen many companies writing checks to their employees on account of this tax cut.
Well, sure, and also if you own a 401k, you've probably got at least in an index fund, which means that you own stock, which is the value of the stock's going to go up. Or like I mentioned, if you're a police officer, then your pension is owned stock, and your pension's going to look better. This benefits everybody.
Yeah, that's right. Now, you wrote another article recently. In U.S. News, the title was "Income Inequality Isn't the Issue." And Gary, this is something I also have written about over the years, going back more than 20 years now. And it's this really crazy emphasis on inequality. And we're seeing it every time there's any kind of a proposal that impacts the economy. You hear this mantra from the Democrats, and certainly anytime there's a tax cut, you hear it from them. Nancy Pelosi says it's Armageddon. It's going to ransack the middle class somehow. God only knows how. Talk about that a little bit. Why is it that the left is so misguided in viewing all of these issues through a lens of inequality?
Well, the first thing is that you can't cut income taxes without cutting income taxes for the wealthy, because the top 1% pay 38% of all the income tax, even though they only earn 19% of the income. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is we should be caring about how poor are the poor. Anything talking about why do I care how rich Bill Gates is? I can fly to Texas in, maybe I have to sit middle seat and he's got his own personal jet. I've got a house. I've got cars. I've got, maybe I've got a 2008 Ford, Escape, and he's got a brand new Maserati. But basically the difference between Bill Gates' lifestyle and my lifestyle or your listener's lifestyle is minuscule. The difference between your lifestyle and a refugee in a Syrian refugee camp is enormous.
Let me just pause you there for a second, Gary. Let me just pause you, because the other comparison I would draw is the difference between your lifestyle and the lifestyle of a person who lives under socialism in Venezuela. In Venezuela, They've had to kill their pets. They've raided the zoos so they could kill the animals and eat them. They fight over dead rats to eat for dinner. That's how you live under socialism in Venezuela.
Yes,
That's an important difference.
And Mises said, Ludwig von Mises wrote in 1927, he wrote a great little book called Liberalism, and what he pointed out was the only way that you can create wealth for the masses is through market capitalism. And and all you got to do is look around at the countries that are if you look at what the income of the bottom 10% of the income distribution by country, those countries that are in the top 25% of the Index of Economic Freedom are 11 times wealthier than the poor are in countries which are in the bottom 25%. And I just tell my students, look, you're going to be born anywhere you want. I'm God, and I'm going to put you anywhere you want, but you're going to be the poorest person there. You don't say, put me in North Korea, put me in Cuba, put me in Venezuela, right? You want to be in a country that has market capitalism. That's where you want to be poor. And we should be focused on, not on what Mises called the politics of envy. We should be focused on how wealthy are the poor? What can we do to help the poor?
And, we're seeing that already. Let's talk about economic growth, because this implicitly is a big part of what you've been addressing here, Gary. But for the last 8 years, we have been mired in, what did you call it, the
plow horse economy.
The plow horse economy. That's marvelous. For the last 8 years, we've been mired in this economy where GDP has been growing at 1 to 2%. I believe Barack Obama is the first American president who never once oversaw a year where GDP grew by 3%. I mean, it's pathetic. And who is it who really needs GDP to grow? It's not the rich. Harvey Weinstein, he's fine. He doesn't care.
Right.
The people who need the economy to grow, who need wealth to be created, are people who are starting out in life, are recent immigrants, are people who are poor, are people who are middle class.
Yes, I mean, you're exactly right. The economic growth is going to help because it provides more product for people. It provides more job opportunity, and you're exactly right. Getting that first job, you're a single mom with 3 kids in the city of Detroit. You want to have economic growth so that your kids, A, that you might have a job, and B, so that your kids have somewhere to work. This is an important factor. Is that as like I said, as Mises pointed out, in 1927, almost 100 years ago, economic growth, it only happens in market capitalism, and this is you're exactly right. This is exactly important for people who are starting out, and for people or people who are in a 63, 64, and they want to keep working for another 6-7 years because they're going to live to be 90.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So Gary, we're already seeing stronger economic growth under the Trump administration. I'm usually reluctant to credit an incoming administration too quickly, because you say, well, what could they possibly have done that would account for it? You have to wait until they do something, and it takes time normally for economic impacts to be felt. But I think a lot of the growth that we've been seeing in 2017 is because businesses have recognized that there's a friendly administration that's not going to be imposing more crazy regulations on them. I think we're already seeing some benefit.
Oh, no question. Because if you're a company, you need to know that the government, what's the government going to be doing? And the signal has been the government is going to be doing less in terms of trying to intervene into your business and telling you what to produce and how to produce it and what you have to do for your employees and this, that, and the other thing. And it's going to let the market work, and people are already seeing the response. In fact, actually, if you go back and read Adam Smith, he says that basically that markets are capable of overcoming the hundreds of encumbrances which the folly of human laws imposes upon it. We've been growing at 1.5% to 2% despite what the government's been doing, right? Now the government's going to be doing things like reducing the tax on things. It's going to have less regulation, allow consumers to determine what's to be produced. In fact, the doubling of the standard deduction works this very way. It's moving us towards a flat tax, lowering the marginal tax rates on individuals and expanding the standard deduction is really not for 90% of Americans that are filers. 90% of the filers are just going to be doing basically the flat tax. They've got a standard deduction of $24,000. They don't have to worry that, gee, did I do this that the government wanted us to do, and if I do, I get this tax break, and if I don't get it. It's really moving us into a more market-based economy.
Well, Gary Wolfram, we've been talking with Professor Gary Wolfram of Hillsdale College. I'm really excited about the future. Like a lot of conservatives, I was depressed for quite a bit of 2017, waiting for the Republican Congress that a lot of us worked so hard to elect to get something really meaningful done. and they certainly have, and I think we are looking at a very happy new year in 2018.
Yes, if you could follow me on Twitter, though, that would be great, because John Miller, who heads the journalism department at Hillsdale College, and I have a bet on who has the most Twitter followers. We have to buy each other lunch every Friday, and I'm down by about 100 Twitter followers. So if you could follow me on Twitter, I can get a free lunch from John Miller, who's a
All right,
journalist.
let's try to make up that 100 Twitter follower deficit. Gary Wolfram, thank you very much for being with us. We're going to go to a break, and we'll have more right after this.
The Laura Ingraham Show.
Welcome back to the Laura Ingraham Show, your healthy radio addiction. John Hinderaker from Powerline filling in for Laura today. We've been talking about the Republican tax cut, talk about a Christmas present, and talk about a Happy New Year. This is one of the better presents that the American people could have gotten, and I'm very excited about it. When we come back from the break, we're going to take your calls. So give us a call, 855-40-LAURA. 855-40-LAURA is the number to call. We'll be right back after this.
Your healthy radio addiction starts now.
Power to the people!
The Laura Ingraham Show.
Welcome to the Laura Ingraham Show, your healthy radio addiction. I'm John Hinderaker from Powerline filling in for Laura today. I hope you and your families have had a marvelous Christmas and are enjoying a terrific holiday season. I had a very Merry Christmas, marred only by the fact that I'm suffering from kind of a severe cold, so if I sound a little funny today, a little scratchy, that's the reason why, and if I hit the cough button once in a while, that's the explanation. But this is a very Merry Christmas. It's a Merry Christmas, I hope, for every one of you personally, and it's a Merry Christmas for the American people, because the Republican Congress and the Trump administration have come together to pass some really important and really positive legislation in the form of the tax reform bill. We've been talking about it. We're going to continue to talk about it for a while. And if you want to weigh in, 855-40-LAURA is the number to call. One of the interesting things about the tax reform bill is how it is being greeted around the world. And it's kind of ironic because here in the U.S. we have these Democrats who are just going nuts and saying crazy things about the bill. Nancy Pelosi, it's Armageddon. It's going to ravage the middle class. It's a Frankenstein monster that's going to devour us all. I mean, it's completely nuts and completely non-substantive. This hysteria that the Democrats generate. But if you look at more sober comment that comes from around the world, it's completely different. And in Europe, economists and policymakers are talking about how they're going to respond because they take it as obvious that enacting a competitive corporate income tax in the U.S. is going to be good for our economy and is going to create issues for theirs. So I want to just quote from an article here about a report that's been done by a group of German economists, and the title of the article is "Germans Fear Huge Loss of Jobs from U.S. Tax Reform." I'll just read a couple of paragraphs from it. This is a report on an article about a report done by German economists on the impact of the Trump GOP tax bill. It begins, German investment in the U.S. is expected to rise by 39 billion euros because of lower U.S. corporate taxes. 39 billion euros is somewhere between $40 billion and $50 billion. And that's just German investment in the U.S. It's not even all European or worldwide investment. That's just German investment expected to rise by somewhere between $40 billion and $50 billion as a direct result of lower U.S. corporate taxes. It continues. While Americans are anxiously awaiting full details of the tax bill now being finalized in Congress, German economists are warning that the changes sought by President Donald Trump mean that significant amounts of new investment and jobs will shift from Europe to the United States. The tax competition will have a new dimension, said Christopher Spengel, chairman of the corporate tax department at the University of Mannheim. He goes on to say that tax experts at the university have done a detailed comparison of the two countries' tax systems and have published a report under the heading, Germany Loses Out in U.S. Tax Reform. Clemens Fust, who heads the IFO economic think tank, also said he believed German business would suffer. Quote, investments and jobs will migrate to the U.S., he said. So around the world, economists and policymakers are looking at the Republican tax bill and are saying, wow, this is going to be great for the United States. It's going to make the U.S. much more competitive. It's going to lead to economic growth in the United States. Many billions of dollars of investment are going to be shifted to the United States from other countries. That's going to create wealth. It's going to create jobs. It's going to be a great thing for the U.S., and other countries are talking about how they're going to respond to this much more effective competition from the United States under the Trump administration. Now, that's a rational, sane response to the Republican tax plan. How about from the Democrats? Are we seeing a rational, sane response to the Republican tax plan? Unfortunately, the answer is no, we are not. And I want to talk just for a couple of minutes about one Democrat in particular, because I think he just typifies the stupidity and the craziness that we see on the left. And the man's name is Robbie Strong. If you haven't heard of Robbie Strong, you really should learn about him. I'm just going to read here from an article in the Daily Mail about Robbie Strong and his response to the Republican tax plan. Quote, a Los Angeles psychologist says he hand-delivered a gift-wrapped package of manure to Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin's Bel Air mansion because the GOP tax bill is bull blank. That's a quote from Robbie Strong. Robbie Strong identified himself as the man who dropped off a box of horse manure at Mnuchin's house in an interview with AL.com. He likened himself to Jesus and said the stunt was, quote, an act of political theater to show that, quote, Republicans have done nothing for the American worker. This is a quote now from Robbie Strong, the psychologist. Think about that, the psychologist from Los Angeles. What I did, he said, I would like to compare to what Jesus did when he went into a temple and overturned the tables of money changers who were exploiting the people financially in the name of religion, Strong said. He said he thinks the new GOP tax bill does just that to the American people. And there's a picture of Robbie Strong, the psychologist from Los Angeles, with a shovel in his hand. He's a kind of a maniacal-looking man with a large beard, and standing next to a package that's got Santa Claus Christmas wrapping around it. He's got a shovel, and he's standing apparently next to a pile of horse manure. Then there's a photograph of the box, which was taken by Robbie Strong, and you can see that it's full of horse manure. And this is from the Daily Mail talking about Robbie Strong, who I would propose is a rather typical 21st century Democrat. I think that the craziness that you see from a guy like Robbie Strong isn't an outlier, isn't just a fluke. I think it really is emblematic of the level of discourse, of the level of rationality that we are seeing from the Democratic Party and its elected representatives. I'm just going to continue here. This is the Daily Mail talking about Robbie Strong. Strong, who works for the Los Angeles Department of Mental Health. Let's just pause on that for a moment. This man who dropped off the box of horse manure in the driveway of the Bel Air, California home of the Secretary of the Treasury, this man works for the Los Angeles Department of Mental Health. It continues. Strong was an organizer of the Occupy LA movement and sides with critics of the $1.5 trillion tax overhaul, saying it favors corporations and the wealthy. He said he got the poop from a friend of his who owns horses, put it in the box, and wrapped it up like a Christmas present. Strong also attached a card addressed to Mnuchin and Trump, reading, quote, "We're returning the gift of the Christmas tax bill. It's bull blank. Warmest wishes, the American people. P.S. Kiss Donald for me." Now, Robbie Strong didn't think this stunt through very carefully. He didn't really stop to consider the implications of putting a large box in the middle of the driveway of the Secretary of the Treasury. So continuing now from the Daily Mail, when the box was delivered to Mnuchin's Bel Air mansion, a bomb squad was called to make sure the stinky gift wasn't anything more explosive. So how do we know? See, the Secret Service has now interviewed Robbie Strong. The FBI, or somebody, I think it's the FBI, has now interviewed Robbie Strong to see whether he poses a threat, a danger to President Trump or Secretary Mnuchin or other government officials. How are they able to identify the perpetrator so quickly? Well, because he self-identified on Facebook and Twitter. The Daily Mail tells us, before delivering the gift on Saturday, Strong posted several images on Facebook. One in which he holds a shovel and is posed next to a box, and another with the box full of poo. "I need someone to ride along and document my Secret Santa project," he wrote in the post. "I'm going to hand-deliver boxes of horse blank to Steve Mnuchin over in Beverly Hills. No disguises, no fake names. Totally owning this one. You're only powerless if you do nothing." Well, not too long thereafter, after the bomb squad came out and investigated the package of horse manure in the driveway and found that it didn't contain a bomb or anything else hazardous, Robbie Strong's doorbell rang, and it was the Secret Service calling, which led to this Facebook post by Mr. Strong, who works in mental health for the city of Los Angeles. He says, "Just had first interview with Secret Service. Yikes." Yikes, he says. "Luckily, I have peace of mind and a clean conscience. I now join my biggest heroes, HERO''S, who also had an FBI file. It's a right, RIGHT, he spells, of passage." It's interesting that this guy who is such a critic of the tax bill and a psychologist working in mental health for the city of Los Angeles is a terrible, terrible speller. But more important, he's a nut. And this kind of over-the-top, crazed reaction to a bill which cuts taxes for almost all Americans who pay taxes and is going to make our economy much more competitive, lead to economic growth, job creation, and the Democrats react like this. Well, we're going to go to a break, and when we return, we're going to come back with your calls. 855-40-LAURA is the number to call, 855-40-LAURA, and we'll be back after these messages. Welcome back to the Laura Ingraham Show. Are you crazy? Good question. I think some of the Democrats are crazy. We were talking about one before the break, Robbie Strong, and we've been talking in general about the Trump administration's and the Republican Congress's gift for Christmas. It's Christmas present to the American people, a pro-growth tax reform. Let's take some calls. 855-40-LAURA is the number to call if you want to weigh in. Let's go to Andrew in Florida on line one. Andrew, welcome to the program.
John, thank you so much for having me. So I read on Drudge Report this morning that MasterCard says it's the most spending for Christmas season ever. And what I can't figure out for the life of me is, we were told a year ago if Trump got elected, the economy would crash and everybody would hate us. And now that the economy is roaring like it never has, we're being told, well, Obama loosened the peanut butter jar for him for 8 years. And Trump just happened to open it. Can I get a concise answer from somebody in charge on that?
It's like, you know what that reminds me of, Andrew? When Ronald Reagan was president, the Democrats kept saying, that gall-darn Reagan is the luckiest man we ever saw. His policies are terrible, and yet the results the results are great. How lucky can he get? Yeah, you're absolutely right. And by the way, I wrote about that master charge survey on Powerline, and one of the points that was emphasized is what was really different about the holiday season this year is that so much of the increased spending was coming from middle income and lower income people. That's what really distinguished it from recent years. Yeah, upper income people were spurging some too. But the real burst in holiday spending was coming from middle income people and lower income people. Let's go to Mark in Virginia on line 2. Mark, you're on the air.
Hey, what we're seeing out there in Los Angeles, this guy that left that horse poop on the gentleman's doorstep was a government worker, and that's no coincidence. We're seeing government workers across the board, county, federal, state, that are becoming activated to protect their own income. And we also saw the same thing with Stroke up there in the FBI. And it's kind of frightening, and that's something that the American people need to be aware of, is that the governments are so big now that they're making twice as much money as we are. They have all these benefits and everything, and they can literally use the government computers to look up people's addresses. They can read every text we've got. And they can sit around and plot these little schemes and make out like these are just legitimate grassroots movements and stuff, and it's not. It's just a tyrannical government that's trying to protect their own income and protect their own empire. It's kind of frightening, and I think the American people need to realize it, and this is no coincidence that this guy there's a county worker.
You know, Mark, you make a very, very important point. A lot of people haven't caught on to the fact that one of the basic dividing lines in American public life is between the public sector and the private sector. And public sector employees, on the average, are paid much more than private sector employees, and on the average, they probably work less than private sector employees. And the Democratic Party can be viewed as a giant public sector union. And it's very corrupt, the self-dealing that goes on between politicians and the unions, where they negotiate wages, and then the unions turn around and contribute to the politicians. You know, it's a very corrupt form of self-dealing. And you're absolutely right. Now, in Virginia, Mark, you've seen this in spades. Virginia used to be a red state, but half the population of Virginia is now crowded into those northern counties that are suburbs of Washington, D.C., and it's all about public spending and public employees.
And that's where all the money is at, and they're stealing it. If you ever wonder why those counties around Washington, D.C. are so wealthy, it's because it's being stolen from all the other counties around America. The same thing was going on in Russia during the 1970s and 1980s. Stupid American communists would go to Russia, and they would visit Moscow, and they'd be like, oh, it's so wonderful in Moscow. The subways are so nice and everything. I even had a public school teacher tell me this ridiculous story, talking about how wonderful communism was, and she didn't realize that, of course, Moscow is nice because they were stealing everybody's
money. Came from everywhere else. Mark, we got to move on here. Take one more call before the break. Let's go to Jim in Florida on line 3. Jim, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Where were the Democrats? Where were they complaining about when they want to complain right now because it's a $1.5 trillion over 10 years? Where were they complaining at when Obama doubled the deficit? They didn't complain at all about that. And what about the money that was given to these companies that went bankrupt?
Yep, no, you're absolutely right about that. Both great points, Jim. The Democrats' complaints are very selective. The Obama administration doubled the national debt, added $10 trillion to it, not a whimper. We're going to be right back after these messages.
Hi, this is Ben Domenech, the host of the Federalist Radio Hour. We're a daily show coming to you 5 days a week from Washington, D.C., where we interview our nation's top journalists, politicians, authors, chefs, economists, entertainers, and more. If you're looking for a contrarian discussion on news, politics, or culture, give us a listen and subscribe at podcastone.com, the new Podcast One app, or at Apple Podcasts.
Oh, baby, baby, it's a wild world.
Welcome back to the Laura Ingraham Show, your healthy radio addiction. I'm John Hinderaker from Powerline, filling in for Laura today. And we are joined now by Chris Neiweem. Chris is an Iraq War veteran, president of Neiweem Group, and a military policy analyst. Chris, thanks for being on the program.
Great to be with you, John.
Chris, we've had some exciting times in the United Nations in recent days, and I think just about all of us conservatives were really proud of UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. First of all, we were proud of President Trump for finally following through on the long-standing promise to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which it is, and set about moving our embassy to Israel's capital. And then we were doubly proud when that move came under attack in the United Nations, and Nikki Haley, the UN ambassador, really stood tall against the enemies of America and of Israel.
Yeah, John, I think President Trump has been very consistent on America First. You know, he campaigned on America First, and it's been go time for that theme since he's been president, and it's just been completely consistent. So, you know, going to the United Nations, setting those expectations, certainly Ambassador Haley is being consistent with what the president wants to do, and essentially that is, you know, we are contributing the troops and the resources and have consistently, and so we are going to put forward our expectations, and I don't think that there's any reason to apologize for that. And I think some of our partners have been so accustomed to, you know, sort of, you know, not challenging those sorts of things that, you know, there's been a little bit of pushback. But frankly, it's very refreshing to see America being put first on the world stage.
Well, I think so, and part of putting America first is putting our allies first. You know, in the Obama administration, the foreign policy of America was to promote our enemies like Iran and Cuba, and undermine our friends, countries like Israel and England. So I think part of putting America first is standing up for our allies instead of our enemies. And you know, one of the things about this, Chris, that is just remarkable to me. I mean, there's no doubt about the fact that the capital of Israel is Jerusalem, and Trump talked about this in his speech when he announced the policy. I mean, the Knesset is in Jerusalem. The Prime Minister's office and residence are in Jerusalem. The Israeli Supreme Court is in Jerusalem. The Israeli Foreign Ministry is in Jerusalem. Almost all Israeli government offices are in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. That's just a fact. And whoever heard of a country that doesn't get to decide where its capital is? This whole thing about the capital of Israel is part of the left's effort to delegitimize that country in preparation for destroying it.
Agreed. You know, I think that it's this sort of globalist groupthink mentality at the UN, and it's just, I think that's been some of the benefit of President Trump and expectation management. In some ways, I think it'll increase our friendships and make our allies stronger. You know, going to NATO and saying, you know, you're going to pay more. Those are just sorts of, you know, a reshuffling of the deck and raising expectations. And with Jerusalem and the capital, you know, question, you know, Congress has long made that position. I mean, that has been the position. I think it's global optics and the politics of optics and the way things look and these other sensitivities in the region. But, you know, the Israel-Palestine, you know, peace process, that's a part and aside. So I just, you know, that getting overly focused on this, I think it's really been a non-issue issue, and the left and the, you know, the sort of, you know, globalism and this sort of collective groupthink at the UN has just not been healthy. And frankly, I find it kind of funny, but the president's mentioned these parties that go on at the UN need to stop as well. I mean, they need to focus on achieving objectives. And I think the president, it's been go time for America first, and he's really made good on that commitment.
The UN is a very corrupt organization, and the members of the UN have long been accustomed to holding votes that don't mean anything, but are politically motivated but have no consequences. And that happened again. Trump announced his intention to move our embassy to Jerusalem, consistent with the Israel Embassy Act of 1995, which was passed by Congress and reaffirmed by the Senate in June on a vote of, I think it was 95-0. And Trump is finally doing it, right? So first there was a Security Council resolution condemning that move, and that was vetoed by Ambassador Nikki Haley. And then, for no reason, no practical reason, there's this vote in the General Assembly to condemn the United States for moving its embassy to Jerusalem and demanding that we not do it, which is really, it's not just an insult to Israel, that's an insult to America. That's an attack on our sovereignty. We can put our embassy wherever we want to put our embassy. And it's shocking to me that how many countries, do you remember offhand how many countries voted against that General Assembly resolution? It wasn't very many.
It wasn't. It was several, and then there were some abstentions, and I think that kind of concerned me a little more as well. I'd like to see Canada help out a little bit more. Obviously there's going to be a feeling out period, but it's disappointing. And when you look at Jordan and Egypt, there's been large U.S. U.S. funding support for those militaries and others. So this is not unrealistic to levy those expectations. And, for most people that look at this debate and kind of have their concerns about it, we need to remember that, the UN is only as strong as the members, and it's the U.S. military, it's the U.S. resources that's really, strengthening, this body and gives it that strength. And, if we're just not going to get support, you hear these, talks of, maybe we just give up on it. I think it still has its utility, but we have got to set the tone over there, and I think that's what the president's doing, is setting the tone. And, there's not going to be apology tours. We're going to be putting our interest first. And if we're going to be supporting financially, we need to be getting something out of that. So this is a good test case to see where, our partners come down, and they need to. I think Ambassador Haley's a strong voice. I really do. I think we're in good shape, and we're just in the setting expectations phase here, John.
Well, I think all of that is correct, but this General Assembly vote is really a reminder of what a deeply corrupt institution the United Nations is. Now, we have allies all around the world, countries we do a lot for in various ways in terms of military assistance, economic aid, all kinds of support, protection. There's countries around the world that would have been invaded if it hadn't been for, the United States military umbrella. And I think there were only 9 countries, if I remember correctly, that voted against that General Assembly resolution condemning the United States in effect. And then others, as you say, who abstained or just didn't show up. But I think that vote is a good indication of how far we have to go in the United Nations and what a corrupt institution it is. Now, Nikki Haley said we're going to be taking names. We're going to watch who votes against us on this, and she's announced that she's going to have a party, and the only people invited to the party are going to be the representatives who at least didn't vote against us, not just the 9 or whatever, right, but those who abstained and so on. Now, that's at least symbolic. But are there some more practical things that we can do to make our displeasure felt?
Well, I think that the UN budget cut is a major, that's a real indication that, look, we are going to do new things. Now, we've had analysis that it's not really a significant, monetary item at this point, but it's still a major shift. So I think that, restricting funding, they always say, money talks, and I like to say so does lack thereof, sort of holding back or writing a smaller check. So I think increased strong tenor at the UN, Ambassador Haley being out there, and also, looking at, restriction if certain expectations aren't met. But, it's It's a cultural issue. It's a cultural issue, and even some of the abstentions. It'd be nice to have those nations in our column, and I especially think that the relationship with Canada. I think that President Trump, one of his biggest advantages is on the campaign trail into the presidency is he spent his own money running, and he's outside of all those special interests. So that gives him a real advantage, not just working with Congress domestically, but on the international stage to simply deliver on his agenda and, go right to the American people. And most Americans are kind of wondering, what are we spending all this money on? Where are these fancy parties, and what's being achieved? And in some respects, it looks like we're moving backwards when some of these allies of ours are not supportive. So it's definitely a new era in foreign policy development. And I think President Trump is moving forward. And there's challenges. We've got North Korea, many other challenges out there, but I think we've got a good team in place that are taking those issues on.
Chris, you mentioned the fact that there's going to be a budget cut at the UN, and I think it's $285 million for the coming fiscal year. And the headlines, I haven't looked into this very deeply, but the headlines seem to indicate that this is something that was negotiated between the U.S. via Nikki Haley and the UN. I'd be delighted to learn that the UN's budget is being cut. Is that really happening?
To my knowledge, there is a reduction. There is a reduction as far as impact, and as far as impact on operations. I've been told, and this was just yesterday, that it would have a minimal impact on operations, but it's certainly a step in a new direction, and it's certainly achieved the intended result of getting the attention of some of our critics, and there have been some analysts and even domestic, here in the United States, Democrat strategists that have been frustrated and saying this is no way to treat our allies, and it's kind of the opposite in my view. It's kind of like, well, wait a minute,
this is no way for our allies to treat us.
Exactly.
That's the salient point. Yeah.
Right, it's like the friend that never pays the bar tab, and then eventually you ask them for the bar tab that they haven't paid, and then they sort of throw their hands up in the air because you're so used to that sort of. It's almost like sort of the principle of sort of entitlement. But I think it's going to be a process, and sometimes there's some groaning. But I think we're heading in the right direction. And another thing, and it's quasi related, but just the North Korea challenge in general. There have been those on the left that have thought, we're being too strong worded and this and that. We're dealing with folks that are testing missiles, testing rockets, being aggressive. The only way you can handle bullies and aggression is with strength and resolve. We've seen throughout history there's no other way. So I think that if we need to understand what we're dealing with, and and having served in the U.S. Army and in Iraq, I can say the UN, it's U.S. troops and U.S. resources that are largely strengthening that body, and so we can't. It's easy to sort of get caught in these globalist conversations, and I'm sure at those UN parties, which I'm proud to say I've never been to any of them, they need to achieve goals that are going to be beneficial to all the members, and that certainly should be the United States as the, I think the greatest partner.
Chris, remind me how to pronounce your last name.
It's Neiweem. It's Dutch, and no one's ever said it right. So if someone says it right, my grandmother will be happy. But it's a Dutch name.
Yeah, that happens with my name as well. Chris, we're talking with Chris Neiweem, Iraq War veteran, president of the Neiweem Group, military policy analyst. Chris, we've been talking about the UN. There are a couple of huge trouble spots in the world today. We've got Iran, which is moving toward nuclear power, trying to assert increasing control over the Gulf region. We've got North Korea, which has a limited number of nuclear weapons, keeps testing ICBMs, apparently with the objective of being able to blow up American cities. And these are problems that have been with us for a while. There's nothing new about this. The Obama administration actually made the Iran situation worse in a number of ways and totally kicked the can down the road on North Korea. And they weren't the first administration to do that either. And so now the Trump administration has been left holding the bag and is going to have to find a way to deal with both of those very troublesome countries. And my question, Chris, is the United Nations of any use to us when we get into really serious foreign policy issues like Iran and like North Korea? Do we get any benefit out of the UN?
That's a really, really good question, John. That's a tough question to answer because there's sort of the idealistic, the theory, and then the practical reality. I do believe they have a role to play, setting the indication that certain things are not going to be acceptable, and whether it's troop commitments in a problematic region. However, we just see the U.S. military continuing to be the global leader, and part of that's geography. We've got troops in South Korea. Obviously, we have troops throughout Europe, and we're still, since post-World War II, we have been the global power that's been able to manage these situations. North Korea is not easy. It's actually very, very difficult. I don't think any administration is going to have it easy. But as you pointed out, the Obama administration, and I think they really meant well in their mind. That they thought, what, if we can just go and show good faith and negotiate and get a deal where they're going to slow down proliferation, it's kind of like, they're going to continue to be bad. They're going to keep doing bad things. We're just giving them a lot of money to slow down their bad behavior. It really should be zero sum, quite frankly, or at least some sort of result that ends with a tangible move in disarmament. And so we really haven't seen that. So having a more strong military posture and just some of the optics of having the vice president in the region and the president, sort of calling out the foreign leader. You have more American liberals concerned about, you can't provoke him. He's an enemy. He's an enemy. He's shown himself to be an enemy at every single step. They need to be handled strongly. So I think the UN should and can help out in that regard. But, in the practical sense, military support, there's still that challenge for them to do more. So, I don't want to say solely the United States, but in the practical sense, I think U.S. troops and U.S. just tenor on the issue, just as far as tone and expectation management, we are still the leaders and solely responsible. And one last point on that, I really think China needs to play a bigger role. I think that's where the administration's trying to work the areas to get some hard economic sanctions going and really isolate that North Korea as much as possible so they can start doing the right thing.
Chris Neiweem, couldn't agree more. My parting comment is that if North Korea does blow up the city of San Francisco, nobody's going to be looking to the United Nations to do something about it. Chris, thank you so much for being with us. We're going to go to a break right now, and we will be back with more on the Laura Ingraham Show after these messages. 855-40-LAURA is the number to call. Be right back.
Thanks for listening to the Laura Ingraham Show podcast. Download new episodes every week at podcastone.com. That's podcastone.com.
Podcast One has new shows on our new app. Check out all the cool features to help you explore our exciting new programming, like America's Lakers podcast with Jay Moore, Sessions with Randy Jackson, So Random with Corinne Olympios, Attack Each Day, The Harbaugh's podcast, Not Just Sports with Susie Schuster and Rich Eisen, and Sound of Success, the Dick Enberg podcast, as well as your old favorites like The Lady Gang, Steve Austin, Shaquille O'Neal, and Adam Carolla. Get the new Podcast One app in the App Store, Google Play, or podcastone.com.